Apache woman said, "We must get married now." That night everything changed. David had never thought much about visiting a cultural festival in the desert, but that Saturday morning, something inside him whispered that he should go. The sun was warm but not too harsh, and the air smelled faintly of sage and roasted corn. Families wandered through stalls filled with handmade crafts, jewelry, and colorful fabrics. Children laughed as they tried on feathered headdresses, and the sound of drums echoed softly in the background. For David, it was all new and it was fascinating. He had always been curious about different cultures, but he had never truly immersed himself in one. Today, it felt like he was stepping into a world that was alive, breathing, and very different from his own. As he walked along the rows of tents, he noticed a small gathering near a fire pit where several people were performing a storytelling ritual. The storyteller's voice rose and fell in rhythm with the crackling flames, and the crowd listened with quiet awe. David edged closer, not wanting to miss a word. That's when he saw her, Naomi. She was sitting near the fire, her long dark hair tied back, her posture straight and confident. She wore a traditional dress with intricate patterns he didn't understand, and her eyes seemed to hold stories that went far beyond the festival. There was a calmness about her, a presence that made David pause. For some reason, he felt as though he had known her for a long time, even though he had never met her before. Naomi's eyes met his for a moment, and she gave a small, welcoming nod. David felt his heart beat a little faster. He walked closer, trying to think of something intelligent to say, but his words seemed to vanish in the warm desert air. Instead, he simply sat down nearby, letting the storyteller finish the tale before speaking. When the story ended, Naomi turned to him and smiled. "Did you enjoy that?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. David nodded, unable to hide his fascination. "Yes, very much," he said. "It's different from anything I've experienced before." Naomi chuckled lightly. "Different can be good," she said. "It can open your eyes to things you never thought were possible." There was a kind of wisdom in her words that made David feel comfortable, yet curious at the same time. He wanted to know more, not just about the story, but about her. They started talking, slowly at first. Naomi asked him about his life, where he had grown up, and what had brought him to the festival. David found himself answering honestly, telling her about his love for nature, his curiosity about people, and his desire to experience life fully. Naomi listened intently, nodding and sometimes tilting her head as if she could see right into his thoughts. There was no judgment, only a quiet, deep interest that made David feel understood in a way he rarely did. As they talked, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. The fire near them crackled louder, and the smell of burning wood mixed with the scent of flowers and herbs from nearby stalls. David felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. There was something about Naomi that drew him in, something magnetic and powerful, yet gentle. He didn't understand it, but he didn't want to resist it either. At one point, Naomi leaned closer, her eyes locking onto his. "David," she said softly, "sometimes life gives us moments we cannot ignore. Moments that demand action even if we are not ready." David blinked, unsure what she meant. She smiled, a mixture of seriousness and warmth. "Tonight is one of those moments. We must get married now." The words hit him like a jolt of lightning. He froze, trying to process what he had just heard. "Married?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. It was impossible, he thought. He had just met her today, had spent only a few hours talking and sharing stories. Marriage was something that took time, planning, understanding. And yet there was something in her eyes, something real, something unwavering that made him pause. Naomi continued, her voice calm and steady. "I know it seems sudden, and I know it feels impossible. But in our way, when destiny calls, it is not something to be delayed. Sometimes we have to follow the heart and not the mind." She reached out and touched his hand lightly. The warmth of her skin sent a shiver down his spine. David felt a whirlwind of emotions, fear, excitement, doubt, and a strange sense of certainty all at once. They sat in silence for a few moments, watching the fire dance. David thought about the practicality of her words. Was she serious? Could this really be happening? And yet, every instinct in his body told him that Naomi was not making a casual request. This was more than a sudden decision. It was a turning point, a moment that could change everything. David tried to speak, but the words seemed inadequate. How could he explain the storm of thoughts and feelings swirling inside him? Instead, he simply looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that this was no ordinary woman. Naomi carried herself with a confidence that came from knowing who she was and where she belonged in the world. She was strong, fearless, and yet compassionate. David felt a mix of admiration and awe, and something deeper stirred in his chest, a sense of belonging he had never known. Naomi smiled again, sensing his hesitation. "You don't have to answer me tonight," she said. "But know this, when we meet, when the heart recognizes its counterpart, waiting too long can sometimes mean missing what was meant to be." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning, and David realized that this encounter was no coincidence. There was a reason they had met, a reason that went beyond simple chance. As the night grew darker, the festival lights twinkled around them. Music floated through the air, and the laughter of families and friends created a comforting background hum. David felt a sense of peace mixed with anticipation. He knew that life would not be the same after tonight, whether he chose to follow Naomi's suggestion or not. Something had shifted inside him, a recognition that life could be sudden, intense, and beautiful all at once. Before they parted for the night, Naomi handed him a small feather tied with a leather string. "Keep this," she said. "It is a reminder that sometimes life asks us to trust the unknown, to step forward even when we are unsure." David held the feather in his hand, feeling its softness and weight, and understood that it was more than just a gift. It was a symbol of possibility, courage, and the journey that lay ahead. As he walked back to his car under the starlit sky, David replayed the events of the day in his mind. He had met a woman who challenged everything he thought he knew about life, love, and destiny. She had spoken words that seemed impossible, yet somehow made sense in a way he could not ignore. His mind raced with questions, but beneath it all, a quiet voice told him that he could not walk away from this moment, not entirely. Something inside him had changed, and the night, with its strange mix of fear and hope, would stay with him forever. By the time he reached his apartment, David was exhausted but exhilarated. He sat by the window, staring at the stars, holding the feather in his hand. The words Naomi had spoken echoed in his mind. "We must get married now." He didn't know what the future held or how such a thing could be possible, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had been touched by something extraordinary, and there was no going back. As sleep finally claimed him, David dreamed of firelight drumbeats and the eyes of a woman who seemed to see straight into his soul. He dreamed of a life he had never imagined, one that was thrilling, terrifying, and completely new. And deep in his heart, he felt a quiet promise that whatever happened next, tonight would mark the beginning of a journey unlike any he had ever known. David woke the next morning with a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. The words Naomi had spoken the night before kept echoing in his mind. "We must get married now." He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the small feather she had given him. Its soft texture seemed almost magical, like a symbol of a world he had only just begun to glimpse. He wondered how he could even begin to understand what she meant. Marriage, after all, was something serious, something that required thought, planning, and time. Yet Naomi had spoken as though destiny had already decided for them. For most of the morning, David walked in a daze. He went to his favorite coffee shop, hoping that a warm cup and the usual morning routine would calm his racing mind. But every time he looked out the window at the bright, clear sky, he imagined Naomi's face, her intense eyes, and the firelight of the festival. It wasn't just attraction. It felt deeper, something like recognition, as if meeting her had awakened a part of him that had always been dormant. David tried to call a friend, hoping to talk it out, but no words seemed enough. "You won't believe this," he thought he could say. "I met someone and she wants to get married tonight." But even saying it aloud made him pause. The idea sounded impossible, absurd even. He could already imagine his friends' reactions, laughing, teasing, maybe even thinking he had lost his mind. Yet somehow, he couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward Naomi. Something inside him said that this was real, that it was urgent, and that he had to respect her wishes. After hours of internal debate, David decided he had to see her again. He drove back toward the festival grounds, now quiet and nearly empty in the morning light. The tents were being packed up, the sounds of music replaced by the chatter of people organizing their stalls. He walked along the familiar paths, hoping that Naomi might be nearby, that he might catch a glimpse of her before she disappeared into her world. He found her sitting near the fire pit once again, her expression calm, her gaze fixed on the flames. It was early, but she seemed already prepared for the day ahead. She looked up when he approached and smiled. "You came," she said simply. There was no surprise in her voice, just a quiet acknowledgement that this meeting had been expected. David sat down next to her, feeling the weight of the moment. "Naomi, I don't know what to say," he began, fumbling with words. "Last night what you said, it was a lot. I mean, we just met. Marriage is something huge." "I'm not sure I can just," he trailed off, unsure how to finish. Naomi tilted her head slightly, listening. "I know," she said gently. "It is a lot. And yes, you have just met me. But sometimes we meet someone and the heart knows before the mind does. We recognize something in each other that cannot wait. It is not about haste. It is about understanding a truth that exists beyond ordinary time." David looked at her, trying to understand. The words made sense in a strange, unfamiliar way. They made sense not logically, but intuitively. It was as though she were speaking not to his brain, but to a part of him that he had never trusted before, the part that believed in instinct, in fate, in the sudden and unexplainable shifts that life sometimes brings. "But I don't even know your family," he said cautiously. "What about them? What about the responsibilities? I feel like I'm walking into something I don't understand." Naomi reached out and touched his hand again, her touch firm and grounding. "Family and responsibilities matter," she said, "and they will be respected. But you must also understand that in our way, sometimes love cannot wait for all conditions to be perfect. Sometimes the heart's timing is different. That is all I ask you to consider." David felt himself drawn in by her sincerity. There was no manipulation, no pressure. She was not demanding or threatening. She was simply telling him a truth, her truth, and asking him to listen with the same seriousness that she gave. His mind raced with questions, but his heart felt a quiet, steady pull toward her. He spent the morning walking and talking with Naomi. She told him stories about her life, her tribe, and the traditions she had grown up with. She spoke about courage, family, and the importance of being true to oneself. David shared more about his life too, his dreams, his fears, and the sense of restlessness that had always lingered inside him. The more they talked, the more he felt a strange sense of clarity. It was as if every word, every story was part of a larger puzzle, slowly revealing a picture he had never seen before. By mid-afternoon, they found themselves sitting in a quiet clearing. The sun was high, and the desert air was warm but gentle. David looked at Naomi and realized that he was no longer questioning whether he wanted to be with her. He was questioning how he could have doubted the connection he already felt. There was a strange certainty in her presence, a calm confidence that seemed to speak of something timeless. "Naomi," he said finally, "I don't fully understand all of this, but I feel like I can't just walk away. I want to honor what you're asking even if I'm scared. Even if I don't know how, Naomi smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. That is all I needed to hear, she said softly. Fear is natural, uncertainty is natural, but the heart knows its path even when the mind does not. They spent the rest of the day preparing in small ways. Naomi showed him how to honor the customs she believed in. She taught him a few simple traditions, ways to show respect and intention, and stories about ancestors who had faced moments like this. David listened carefully, not just because he wanted to learn, but because he realized that this was more than ceremony. It was a way of understanding life, love, and responsibility. As the evening approached, David felt a growing sense of anticipation. He was still nervous, still unsure of what the night would bring, but he also felt a deep sense of purpose. Naomi's presence had changed the way he saw the world. He realized that life could be sudden, intense, and transformative. He realized that some moments demanded courage, demanded trust, demanded stepping into the unknown. Before sunset, Naomi turned to him and said, "We will follow what the heart has spoken. Tonight, we begin a new chapter." Her voice was calm, but there was an undeniable strength in it. David looked at her and saw not just a woman he admired, but a partner who had already taught him more about life in one day than he had learned in years. David nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. He didn't know what exactly would happen that night. He didn't know if everything would go perfectly. But he knew one thing: he could not turn back. Naomi had opened a door to a world he had never known, and he was ready, finally, to step through it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in a golden glow, David felt a strange calm settle over him. The earlier fear was still there, but it was mixed with a quiet determination. Tonight would be the night everything changed. He didn't know how and he didn't know why, but he trusted that it would be meaningful. And most importantly, he trusted Naomi. As they walked together toward the place where the night's events would unfold, David realized that life sometimes asks us to leap before we fully understand. Sometimes it asks us to trust, to surrender, and to follow the heart even when the mind protests. He felt a deep, steady rhythm inside himself, a rhythm that matched the drum beats he had heard the day before. For the first time in a long time, David felt fully alive, fully present, and fully ready to face whatever was coming next. Naomi's hand in his was warm, grounding, and reassuring. And as the desert sky turned dark, sprinkled with stars, David took a deep breath and stepped forward, knowing that the night ahead would mark the beginning of a journey he would never forget. The desert night stretched wide and quiet around David and Naomi. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of sage and sand, and the stars above sparkled like tiny lanterns in the sky. David's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear, excitement, and awe. Everything that had led him to this moment, the festival, the stories, the sudden words Naomi had spoken, had brought him here. He didn't fully understand what lay ahead, but he knew that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Naomi led him along a narrow path toward a small clearing. The soft glow of a fire flickered ahead, and David could see a few figures gathered, quietly observing them. These were elders and family members, people whose eyes held a lifetime of wisdom and experience. David felt a sudden nervousness, realizing that he was not just stepping into Naomi's life but into her world, a world built on tradition, respect, and connection. Naomi squeezed his hand lightly, sensing his anxiety. "It is all right," she whispered. "Just follow me and trust." Her calmness was contagious, and David took a deep breath, trying to match her steadiness. They approached the circle of people, and Naomi bowed slightly in respect, introducing David as her partner. David followed her example, bowing as best as he could, feeling both awkward and honored. The elders nodded, some smiling, some serious, but all watching with quiet approval. Naomi spoke in her native tongue for a few moments, words David didn't understand but felt in the rhythm and tone. He realized that some things could not be understood with logic alone, they had to be felt. He tried to be present, to absorb the atmosphere, the intention, and the energy of the moment. Then came the rituals. Naomi guided David through a series of small, symbolic acts, lighting candles, offering herbs to the fire, and repeating simple words of intention. Each step felt weighty, significant, and David realized he was not just participating in a ceremony. He was stepping into a way of seeing life, love, and commitment that was different from anything he had known. Every gesture mattered. Every word carried meaning. As the ceremony continued, David noticed the fire crackling higher, its flames dancing as if alive. Naomi stood close, her presence reassuring. He watched her, marveling at the confidence and grace she displayed. She seemed completely in her element, completely at peace, yet fully aware of the power of the moment. David felt small in comparison but also inspired. He wanted to rise to the occasion, to meet the demands of this night, even if he didn't fully understand them. Then came a moment that no one could have anticipated. A sudden wind swept through the clearing, sending sparks from the fire into the air. The group flinched, and David's first instinct was to step back. Naomi, however, remained calm, her hand gripping his. "It is all right," she said. "This too is part of life. Nothing worth experiencing comes without challenge." The wind grew stronger, and a few people murmured in concern. David felt his heart race, not just from fear, but from the realization that life could change in an instant. Naomi guided him to the fire, showing him how to remain grounded, how to focus on the intention rather than the chaos. In that moment, David understood that this night was about more than ceremony. It was about trust, courage, and partnership. He had to rely on Naomi, and she relied on him. Once the wind calmed, the ceremony resumed. Naomi and David stood together, facing the elders. Naomi's voice was steady as she repeated vows in her language, and David followed, repeating words he did not fully understand but meant deeply. The symbolic acts continued, passing a cup of water between them, tying a small cord around their wrists, and offering silent thanks to the ancestors. David realized that these gestures were more than tradition. They were lessons in patience, respect, and unity. As the night deepened, a moment of quiet reflection arrived. Naomi and David sat side by the fire, the others watching respectfully from a distance. Naomi looked at David with intensity. "Tonight, everything changes," she said. "Not because of what others see, but because of what we choose to feel, to embrace, and to become together." David nodded, feeling a weight lift from his chest. Fear and doubt were still present, but they were no longer overwhelming. Instead, there was clarity, a sense of purpose, and a deep recognition that this night would mark the beginning of a profound journey. He realized that marriage, in this context, was not about paperwork or social expectation. It was about commitment, understanding, and the courage to face life together, no matter what challenges arose. Just as they were settling into the quiet, a small crisis unfolded. One of the younger children, curious and playful, had wandered too close to the fire and tripped. The elders reacted quickly, and David instinctively jumped forward to help. Naomi was by his side, guiding him calmly. Together, they lifted the child to safety. The moment was frightening, yet it revealed something important. In life, unexpected events occur, and how partners respond defines the strength of their bond. David realized that the night's rituals had prepared him not just for symbolism, but for action, for responsibility, and for care. After the commotion settled, the elders spoke words of blessing. Their voices were warm and resonant, carrying gratitude, approval, and hope. David felt honored, humbled, and a little overwhelmed. He looked at Naomi, who smiled gently, her eyes reflecting pride and reassurance. In that instant, he understood that love was not just a feeling but an action, a choice, and a shared journey. The night continued with storytelling and song. Naomi shared more about her family history, tales of resilience, courage, and wisdom passed down through generations. David listened intently, realizing that he was not just witnessing a culture, he was becoming part of it. He felt connected in ways he had never imagined, not just to Naomi, but to something larger, something timeless. As the fire burned lower, Naomi and David stepped aside for a moment of quiet intimacy. She took his hands in hers and looked into his eyes. "You see," she said softly, "life is not always predictable. Love is not always convenient, but when it calls, we must answer. Tonight, we answered." David felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had never felt such a mixture of awe, gratitude, and love. He realized that this night, which had begun with uncertainty and fear, had transformed him. He had stepped into the unknown and discovered courage, clarity, and a connection that went beyond words. They sat together in silence for a long time, watching the stars reflected in the desert sands. The quiet was comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos and excitement of the evening. David felt a sense of peace he had never known, a feeling that life had purpose, that love had direction, and that the choices they made together would shape their path forward. Before leaving the clearing, Naomi tied a small knot in the cord around their wrists, a symbol of unity and protection. "Carry this with you," she said. "Not as a reminder of what has happened, but as a promise of what we are creating together." David touched the cord gently, feeling its significance deep in his heart. As they walked back toward the edge of the desert, the first hints of dawn began to glow on the horizon. David realized that he had been changed, that the night had tested him, taught him, and opened him to a love that was both tender and strong. Naomi walked beside him, her hand still in his, and he felt a sense of companionship that was both exhilarating and comforting. The night had been full of fear, challenge, and uncertainty, but it had also been full of beauty, trust, and discovery. David understood that the lessons of this night would stay with him forever. He had witnessed the power of tradition, the strength of character, and the transformative nature of love. And most importantly, he had learned that sometimes life demands courage in ways we cannot anticipate, and that true partnership is forged not just in comfort, but in action, trust, and shared experience. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, David felt a quiet joy settle in his heart. The night everything changed had passed, and yet its impact would remain. He knew that challenges lay ahead, that life would not always be easy, but he also knew that he and Naomi would face them together. In that desert dawn, David felt the truth of Naomi's words, the reality of the choice they had made, and the depth of the bond that had been formed. He was no longer the same man who had arrived at the festival hours before. He was someone ready to embrace life fully, to honor tradition and love, and to walk into the future with courage and hope. And as Naomi looked at him, her eyes filled with quiet understanding and strength, David felt a profound certainty. The night had changed everything, and in that change they had both found the beginning of a journey that would last a lifetime. The days after the night in the desert were full of a strange mixture of excitement, adjustment, and quiet reflection for David and Naomi. Life had shifted in a way that neither of them could have anticipated, and now they had to navigate the reality of their new commitment. It was one thing to experience a life-changing night, full of rituals, firelight, and emotion. It was another to live day to day, blending two worlds, two cultures, and two ways of seeing life. David woke early one morning to the soft light filtering through the curtains of Naomi's home. He lay still for a few moments, thinking about how different everything felt. He was no longer just himself. He was part of a partnership, a union that demanded respect, care, and attention. Naomi stirred beside him, her face calm but her eyes bright with intention. She smiled at him, and in that smile, David felt both comfort and responsibility. The first days were gentle but full of lessons. Naomi introduced him to her family in a more personal way than the night of the ceremony had allowed. Her parents, her cousins, and close friends welcomed David, though their eyes measured him carefully. David understood that acceptance would not come instantly. It had to be earned through action, respect, and understanding. Naomi guided him patiently, explaining the significance of gestures, words, and small customs. David found himself learning more than he had ever imagined. He learned how to prepare traditional meals, how to respectfully participate in family gatherings, and how to observe rituals that had been practiced for generations. At first, he struggled. His hands trembled when tying ceremonial cords, and he often forgot small steps in traditional practices. Naomi would smile, correct him gently, and explain why each action mattered. David realized that the patience and care she displayed were not just about teaching him customs. They were about teaching him understanding, humility, and respect for a way of life he had never known. Outside their home, life presented new challenges as well. David was used to routines that were entirely his own: work, friends, and personal hobbies. Now, his days had to accommodate Naomi's commitments, cultural responsibilities, and the ways she honored her heritage. He sometimes felt frustrated or unsure, struggling to balance his old habits with the new expectations. Naomi noticed and addressed it calmly. "Life is not about abandoning yourself," she said one evening as they walked along a quiet trail. "It is about growing together, learning together, and finding ways to honor both your path and mine." Her words stayed with him, shaping his approach to the challenges they faced. David realized that marriage in this context was not just about love in the romantic sense. It was about partnership, about being present, attentive, and willing to grow as a person alongside someone else. Every small effort, every act of patience, and every attempt to understand mattered more than he had ever imagined. Evenings were their time to connect without expectation or ceremony. After busy days filled with learning and adjustment, David and Naomi would sit together by the fire, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking. They shared stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. David discovered that Naomi's life had been shaped by strength, independence, and a deep connection to family. She had faced challenges from a young age and had learned to navigate them with grace and courage. Listening to her, David felt admiration and love growing in ways that went beyond physical attraction. Yet life was not always easy. There were moments of tension and doubt. David sometimes felt overwhelmed, unsure if he could fully meet the expectations placed upon him. Naomi noticed but never scolded or criticized. Instead, she encouraged him to reflect, to learn, and to try again. One day, after a minor misunderstanding during a family gathering, David felt embarrassed and frustrated. Naomi approached him quietly and said, "Mistakes are not failures. They are opportunities to grow. You are learning, and I am here with you." Her words were simple but powerful, giving him courage to continue even when he felt uncertain. They also faced external skepticism. Friends who had known David before his meeting with Naomi were curious, sometimes critical. "You married her so quickly," some would say. "How do you know it's real?" David struggled to explain. He knew it wasn't about speed or convenience. It was about connection, trust, and a commitment to a shared journey. He learned that not everyone would understand, and that was acceptable. The only thing that mattered was that he and Naomi were building their lives together with respect, care, and love. Over time, David began to feel more confident in his new role. He learned how to navigate Naomi's traditions, how to participate in family and community life, and how to make small decisions together. He discovered that partnership required listening more than speaking, observing more than assuming, and acting with intention rather than impulse. Naomi's guidance and patience helped him see the world through her eyes, teaching him lessons he could not have learned alone. One afternoon, David and Naomi went to the desert for a quiet walk. The air was warm and the landscape stretched endlessly around them. They talked about their future, dreams, hopes, and even worries. David shared fears about failing to meet expectations, while Naomi shared her own worries about maintaining balance between tradition and change. They laughed, planned, and supported each other, realizing that partnership was not about perfection, but about willingness to face life together, whatever it might bring. David began to see growth not only in himself but in Naomi as well. She had always been strong and independent, but he noticed moments when she allowed herself to rely on him, to share vulnerabilities and fears. These moments deepened their connection, teaching him that love was about balance, mutual support, and trust. They were learning together, shaping a life that neither could have created alone. Financial matters also presented challenges. David had to adjust to shared responsibilities, budgeting together, and making decisions that affected both of their lives. At first, these issues caused tension, but they approached them with patience and communication. Naomi's practical wisdom and David's adaptability complemented each other, and slowly, they found harmony in decision-making. These practical lessons, though less romantic than desert nights or ceremonies, were essential in shaping the foundation of their partnership. Through it all, there were moments of joy and laughter. David learned to dance in Naomi's world, not just literally but figuratively, learning her rhythms, her customs, and her way of seeing life. They celebrated small victories, shared meals with family, and enjoyed quiet walks under the stars. Each day added layers of understanding, intimacy, and connection. David realized that love was not just about emotion, it was about action, attention, and patience. Months passed, and the couple began to feel fully integrated into each other's lives. The challenges of adjustment had given way to confidence, understanding, and deep affection. David found himself looking forward to mornings with Naomi, evenings by the fire, and the small, ordinary moments that now felt extraordinary because they were shared. Naomi, in turn, trusted him in ways she had never trusted anyone, sharing her world and traditions openly. One evening, as they sat together outside their home, Naomi looked at David and said, "We have come a long way. The night that changed everything was only the beginning. Life is full of challenges, but together we are stronger." David nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He realized that the true journey was not just about the dramatic night of their union, but about the daily, often quiet work of living together with respect, understanding, and love. In these moments, David understood that life with Naomi was not always easy, but it was always meaningful. Every challenge, every moment of doubt, every effort to learn and grow had strengthened their bond. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and adjustment, and emerged stronger, more connected, and more capable of embracing the future together. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky once again, David felt a sense of peace and gratitude. He had been transformed, not just by love, but by the experience of learning, growing, and walking alongside someone whose strength and wisdom shaped every moment. Naomi's presence had changed him, and he knew that life with her would continue to challenge and inspire him in ways he could not yet imagine. David took Naomi's hand in his, feeling the warmth, trust, and commitment in that simple gesture. They sat quietly, watching the night sky, knowing that the journey ahead would be full of unknowns, but confident in their ability to face it together. In that quiet moment, David realized that the true meaning of the night that changed everything was not just the ceremony or the vows. It was the shared journey of growth, trust, and partnership that would define the rest of their lives. Time passed, and David and Naomi had settled into a rhythm that was uniquely their own. Life was no longer about the dramatic intensity of the desert night when everything had changed. It was about the quiet, daily work of building a life together. Each day brought small victories, challenges, and moments of connection that together formed the foundation of their shared journey. David often reflected on how far they had come and realized that love was not simply a feeling, it was a choice, a commitment, and an ongoing practice of patience, understanding, and respect. David had grown in ways he had never imagined. He had learned to see the world through Naomi's eyes, to appreciate traditions that had once seemed strange or foreign, and to recognize the value of community, family, and history. At the same time, Naomi had come to trust him fully, allowing him to share his own thoughts, ideas, and concerns, and respecting the perspective he brought from his own background. Their relationship had become a balance of giving and receiving, teaching and learning, guiding and following. One afternoon, David sat with Naomi in the small garden behind their home. The sun was warm on their faces, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind created a peaceful atmosphere. They were preparing for a community gathering, where families and friends would come together to share food, stories, and laughter. David had taken on many responsibilities in these gatherings, from setting up the area to assisting with meals. He had grown confident in these roles, no longer feeling like an outsider trying to navigate unknown customs. Naomi looked at him with a smile. "You have come a long way," she said softly, "not just in understanding the customs, but in becoming part of our life. I am proud of how you have embraced all of this, with heart and effort." David felt a warmth in his chest, realizing that her words carried a depth of meaning beyond simple praise. They were recognition of growth, respect, and partnership. They spent the next few hours preparing, laughing at small mistakes, and helping each other adjust to the demands of hosting. David realized that these ordinary tasks, shared with care and attention, were as meaningful as the dramatic night when their lives had first intertwined. He understood that love was built not only in extraordinary moments, but in the way two people moved through everyday life together, supporting, learning, and growing. That evening, as the gathering began, David felt a sense of pride and belonging he had never known. Friends and family arrived, bringing food, music, and warmth. Naomi's relatives welcomed him with smiles, laughter, and gentle teasing, and David realized that he was no longer just an observer, he was fully part of this world. The sense of community, respect, and connection was overwhelming in the most beautiful way. He watched Naomi interact with her family, the ease with which she moved among them, the way she honored her ancestors and traditions, and he felt admiration deepen into love. As the night progressed, they sat together near the fire, sharing stories and enjoying the quiet moments between laughter and music. David reflected on their journey, the sudden meeting at the festival, the intense night that had changed everything, the early days of adjustment, and the slow, steady growth of understanding. Every step had brought them closer, not just emotionally but spiritually and practically. He realized that the night everything changed had been the beginning, but life was what came after, the effort, the learning, and the shared experiences that truly shaped a partnership. Naomi leaned her head on David's shoulder and he felt a deep sense of peace. "Do you ever think about that first night?" she asked quietly. David nodded. "I do," he said. "It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. I didn't understand then, but I do now." It wasn't just about the ceremony. It was about beginning a journey, and everything since has been part of learning how to walk it together. Naomi smiled. "Exactly. That night set the stage, but life is the story we write together every day." Their conversation was interrupted by a small child running toward them, holding a handmade gift, a simple bracelet made of colorful beads. The child shyly handed it to David, who accepted it with a smile and a sense of humility. Naomi explained that in their tradition, Giving and receiving such gifts was a sign of acceptance, trust, and blessing. David realized that he had truly become part of the community, not through force or obligation, but through respect, understanding, and shared experience. Over the following months, David and Naomi faced challenges, as all couples do. Financial responsibilities, personal habits, and occasional disagreements tested their patience. But they approached these challenges with the lessons they had learned: communication, empathy, and mutual respect. David learned to listen without judgment, to act with thoughtfulness, and to seek solutions rather than dwell on problems. Naomi continued to guide with patience and clarity, showing him the value of steady intention and understanding. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, they sat together in the quiet of their home. The moonlight spilled across the room, creating a serene atmosphere. David reflected on how far he had come, from a man who had been uncertain, fearful, and overwhelmed, to someone capable of love, patience, and responsibility. He realized that the transformative power of the first night had not been in the rituals themselves, but in the way it had opened him to growth, courage, and connection. Naomi looked at him with a gentle smile. "You have grown so much," she said. "Not because I asked you to, but because you chose to. That is what makes this partnership strong. Love is not just feeling, it is learning, growing, and showing up every day." David nodded, understanding that she was right. The journey had been challenging, but the rewards were immeasurable. They continued to build a life filled with shared experiences, celebrations, quiet mornings, walks in the desert, evenings by the fire, and small acts of kindness. David found joy in cooking with Naomi, learning more about her culture, and participating in family traditions. Naomi found joy in sharing her world with David, watching him embrace life with curiosity, respect, and love. Together, they created a life that was rich, meaningful, and deeply connected. As the years passed, their bond strengthened. Friends and family who had once been skeptical came to see the depth of their love and commitment. David and Naomi had faced challenges, celebrated victories, and grown together in ways that no single night could have foretold. They had built a partnership grounded in trust, respect, and shared values, a partnership that allowed both of them to flourish as individuals while remaining deeply connected. One evening, as they sat under the stars in the desert where it had all begun, David reflected on the journey. He thought about the sudden, unexpected words Naomi had spoken. "We must get married now." At the time, they had seemed shocking, impossible, even frightening. But looking back, he realized that those words had been the beginning of everything, the catalyst that had led to growth, love, and a life he could not have imagined alone. Naomi squeezed his hand and said softly, "Do you see now? That night wasn't just a change, it was a choice. A choice to trust, to leap, and to embrace what life offered. Every moment since has been part of that choice." David smiled, feeling the truth of her words deep in his heart. He realized that life was not about avoiding fear or uncertainty, but about stepping forward together, even when the path was unknown. They stayed outside for hours, watching the desert sky, feeling the cool breeze and the quiet power of the land. David understood that love, partnership, and growth were not defined by grand gestures alone, but by the accumulation of small, thoughtful actions: listening, learning, caring, and choosing each other every day. As the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, David and Naomi stood together, hand in hand. The night that had changed everything was a memory, but its impact was enduring. It had set them on a journey of trust, learning, and love that would continue for a lifetime. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and challenge, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. David realized that the story was not about a single night or a sudden decision. It was about life itself, the choices made every day, the growth achieved through effort and understanding, and the love nurtured through patience, respect, and shared experience. Naomi had been the catalyst, the guide, and the partner, but the journey was theirs together. As they turned to walk back toward their home, the desert bathed in morning light, David felt a deep sense of peace. Life had tested them, transformed them, and brought them closer than he had ever imagined possible. The journey was not over, but he knew that together they could face whatever came next. And in that realization, he found joy, hope, and gratitude for the night that had truly changed everything.